Okay, so we'd like to welcome you to part 2 of our current event and weekly Bible study for April 6, 2008. And we're going to continue with the last part. And Doug had brought up a good point too, and this was in here. I edited a lot out. This original study was about 8 pages, and a lot of it I edited out. A lot of it was repetitive and rhetorical. But they did heavily emphasize also a tenet of the Golden Dawn being a very, very important tenet was the Kabbalah, the study of the Kabbalah. And this is something that you see very much prevalent in a lot of the occult literature, times past and today, the importance of the Kabbalah, which is basically the highest form of witchcraft, Jewish, I guess you'd call it Jewish witchcraft, this type of thing. So if we go further, this is another quote from this literature regarding this Charles Williams, who was an Inkling, who was best friends with C.S. Lewis. And this goes on to say, and it was maybe also from Waite's writings that Williams acquired some of his knowledge of black magic. Whatever the sources, by the late 1920s, Williams was thoroughly acquainted with the terminology and the practices of black magic. To him, it was as valid as a form of symbolism as any symbol in Christianity. End of quote. Another quote reads, So though he, Williams, soon outgrew the Golden Dawn and left the order, the date is not known, the symbolism and the knowledge of the occult that he had acquired during its membership remained with him, though. Okay, so this Charles Williams, the best friend of C.S. Lewis, this very dark occult man, he left the Golden Dawn, much like Aleister Crowley left the Golden Dawn, because there was an internal power struggle between Aleister Crowley and one of the original founders, Mathers. And I believe one of the reasons Crowley left is because that they weren't hardcore enough for him. He wanted to get into the really overt practicing of the black magic, whereas the Order of the Golden Dawn didn't want to take it as far as Crowley wanted to take it. I don't know if William left for the same reasons or not, but he did leave. But he'd acquired much of this occult knowledge while he was there. And then it says, not least because in its extreme form of black magic was the popular opposite of Christianity. So in other words, within the Golden Dawn was an extreme form of black magic that was in polar opposition with Christianity. This is another quote from a resource entitled From Charles Williams, The Last Magician, by Greville Lindrop. Now again, remember, the Bible says out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses a thing is established. This is well known that this guy was heavily involved in the occult, and that his close relationship with both C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. Charles Williams, who was a devout Anglican, just like C.S. Lewis, as well as a former member of the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, and a specialist in the Tarot and the Kabbalah. So he was also a member of the Rosy Cross, another occult organization. He specialized in tarot cards and the Kabbalah, which we just mentioned. Okay, was a close friend of Tolkien during the years of the Second World War, and even a closer friend, almost indeed, to his spiritual advisor, C.S. Lewis. He is, quote, the last magician, both as the last of the magically creative Inklings to receive due attention. They called him the last magician. And as well as the last major writer to emerge from the Inklings, as Yeats did before him, from the Western occult tradition. Okay, so Yeats, who was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Charles Williams, most likely C.S. Lewis, and also Tolkien, and essentially they all wrote in a very, very similar fashion from the Western occult tradition. They drew upon their vast knowledge of the occult, and they put it into this supernatural fantasy occult literature, which has an incredible, which had an appeal back then, but has much more of an incredible appeal now, as we're being more and more indoctrinated into witchcraft. He was also the greatest 20th century poet to take the Arthurian legends, the Arthur, Camelot things. He took the Arthurian legends for his theme. C.S. Lewis wrote of his poems. He said in one spot, "They seem to me for their profound wisdom to be among the 2 or 3 most valuable books of verse produced in the century." This is a quote from C.S. Lewis about Charles Williams. They seem to me for their profound wisdom, what, their profound occult wisdom, demonic wisdom, for their profound wisdom to be among the 2 or 3 most valuable books of verse produced in the century. What about the Bible, C.S. Lewis? I thought that you were a Christian apologist. Yet you're praising this man who was demonically possessed? Well, hey, birds of a feather flock together. What absolute blasphemy from a supposedly highly regarded Christian apologist. Williams was an occultist, trained in A.E. Waite's Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, an organization descended from the Yeats Order of the Golden Dawn. A lifelong Christian, a lifelong supposed Christian, give me a break, he challenged the church's traditional views with a theology of romantic love and urging a positive reassessment of sexuality. So you remember he has this erotic conception of love where he tries to compare that to the love of God. I don't even know what he was going with there, and I don't even really want to know. Alongside his marriage, he maintained an agonizingly unconsummated 18-year-old love affair with Phyllis Jones. This is this Charles Williams guy. And acquired a host of disciples. Well, hey, C.S. Lewis did the same thing. They all had their mistresses. Really, is this like an earmark of a Christian or a devil? An agonizingly unconsummated 18-year-old love affair with Phyllis Jones, and the guy was married? And he acquired a host of disciples, young women in particular, who depended on him for spiritual advice. Talk about going to the devil to get spiritual advice. He continued, sometimes with their cooperation, to practice magical rituals which he believed were essential to sustain his creativity. Now, this sounds much like his buddy, Aleister Crowley, who would go around and brag about all these magical sexual rites that he would do with both men, women, and children in order to maintain his power. Okay, they believe that you have to perform this ceremonial magic, which was a big part of the Order of the Golden Dawn, in order to maintain your occult power, and in order to increase it. Okay, and who was inspiring him to do this? It was not the Lord Jesus Christ. So who knows what went on? It's not even appropriate to even talk about it. But I think you can kind of do the math in your head and realize there was some really wicked, evil stuff going on here. Another quote says, "A brilliant Anglican theologian and an interpreter of Christian doctrine," this is this Charles Williams, "he was a trained occultist who even continued to practice what can only be called magical rituals with a sexual or even sadistic tinge to them." But yet this person says that he was a brilliant Anglican theologian and an interpreter of Christian doctrine, and at the same time he performed magical rituals with a sexual sadistic tinge to them? Doesn't quite add up. Remember, a fountain cannot yield both fresh and salt water. And we've got a lot of that going on here, supposedly. It's all bad. Okay? Here's another quote, some more quotes from a article called A Trouble in Narnia, The Occult Side of C.S. Lewis by Marianne Collins. This is from February 2006. Okay, so quoting from this article, this Marianne Collins says, "I've been uneasy about the enthusiasm for Narnia. Then one morning I woke up vividly remembering some things about the third Narnia book. And now I recognize the root of what has been troubling me. I had read all the C.S. Lewis books, including his essays, his collections of letters, his science fiction, and the Narnia books. I read most of the books more than once. Now, this is something I can't say I have any personal experience on. Yes, we've quoted a lot from his own writings, his own autobiography, other people talking about him, but these are people that have actually read the books, been there, done it type of thing. I also read all the books of Charles Williams. Well, why wouldn't you? Because if C.S. Lewis regarded Charles Williams as like this unbelievable writer, and his works were the most important works of the last 20th century, or among them, which is what he flat out said, it was his most dearest friend. Well, hey, if you have a lot of respect for C.S. Lewis, we would want to be drawn into what Charles Williams would write about too, right? She also read all his books because he was a close friend of C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis spoke so highly of him. And I read all of George MacDonald's books because Lewis admired him and spoke well of his books as well. And I don't even know about that guy, but The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the third book of the Narnia series. It directly promotes spells and magic. Chapter 10, which is entitled The Magician's Book, features a book of spells that is on an island inhabited by invisible creatures called Dufflepuds. Lucy works a spell to make the Dufflepuds visible. She goes through a spell book, and it is beautiful and fascinating. Then she finds the right spell and says the words and follows the instructions, and then the Dufflepuds in Aslan become visible. Aslan, remember, is the type of Christ figure, the lion type of Christ figure. Her spell made Aslan visible. And he is pleased with what she did. So in other words, this false Christ, Aslan, is pleased with her witchcraft. Well, this is right out of C.S. Lewis's book, the 10th chapter of the Voyages of the Dawn Treader, of the Narnia series, which is what's so popular in the theaters right now, and has been. Many Christians are treating the Narnia books as an allegory. The Aslan representing Jesus, the children representing Christians. If you do this with the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, then you portray Jesus as being pleased when Christians do magic and work spells. You see where all this is leading? It's the whole point of it. This is why Satan has put so much trouble into this. This is effort that Satan has put forth through his pawns, like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and Charles Williams. And you support the idea that there are good spells and good magic. The belief is the basis for modern white witchcraft. However, the Bible clearly forbids any such form of witchcraft. Deuteronomy 8, verses 10 through 12 says, "There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, child sacrifice, or that useth divination, fortune-telling of any way, shape, or form, or an observer of times, astrology, or an enchanter, one that works spells, or a witch practicing witchcraft or consulting with a witch, or a charmer," would be a witch using charms or other objects for the protection or good luck, or a consulter with familiar spirits, which is basically channeling demons, or a wizard, which is just another form of witch, or a necromancer, which is basically trying to contact the dead. "For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord." Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 12. Okay, so not something you want to be participating in as a born-again Christian. Exposing it's one thing. Participating in it is a totally different thing. And when you read these books and you embrace them and you get into this fantasy make-believe world, you're subjecting yourselves to the very spirits that governed the person that wrote the fantasy occult literature. And I guarantee you something else. When you buy one of these books, like the Narnia Chronicles of the Lord of the Rings, you're probably bringing in a big fat demon into your house. It's like a cursed object. Okay? Because the spirits that wrote that book are going to be attached to these writings. Okay? So that's another thing that we haven't really even touched upon, but that is also very, very valid. In his autobiography, which was entitled Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis tells how at the age of 13 he abandoned his Anglican faith due to the influence of his school mistress, who was involved with Theosophy, Rosicrucianism, spiritualism, the whole Anglican, Anglo-American occultist tradition. And Lewis developed a, quote, lust for the occult that remained with him even after he returned to Anglicanism. Did you know that? In another quote, he said, this is from his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, pages 58 through 60. He says, quote, "In that started in me something with which, on and off, I have had plenty of trouble with since. The desire for the preternatural, such as the passion for the occult. Not everyone has this disease. Those who have Those who have will know what I mean. In other words, those who have this disease, this passion for the occult. This is C.S. Lewis from his own autobiography. I once tried to describe it in a novel. It is a spiritual lust, and like the lust of a body, it has the fatal power of making everything else in the world seem uninteresting while it lasts. End of quote. I mean, I'm speechless after reading that quote. And that's just one of the many. The lust for the occult that has the power of making everything else in the world seem uninteresting while this lust for the occult lasts. That's why Satan wants to get you in it. Because, hey, these fantasy books and these fantasy movies and all this other stuff, it's more interesting than the Bible. It talks about sin and hell and all these other things. It talks about maybe an accountable God. It talks about there being only one way. Well, this is way more interesting. That's exactly what Satan wants. Lewis said that he described that lust for the occult in a novel. It occurred, and we're going to talk about that. It occurs in the third book of his science fiction trilogy. A man is in the process of being initiated into an inner ring of scientists who are occultists. They worship demons, which they call macrobes, which are huge, powerful, invisible beings as opposed to microbes, which are tiny, invisible things. Here, he surely at last... Okay, this is a quote from this book. Here, surely at last, so his desire whispered to him, was the true inner circle of all. The circle whose center was outside the human race. The ultimate secret, the supreme power, the last initiation, the fact that it was almost completely horrible did not in the least diminish its attraction. End of quote. Now, let's just go through that again, because these poet guys write in such a way where sometimes you read it the first time and you don't really think anything of it. Okay? So, from this quote, from this book, this third book, which is called That Hideous Strength, a Modern Fairy Tale for Grown-Ups, pages 259 and 260 by C.S. Lewis. He said, surely at last was the true inner circle of all, the circle whose center was outside the human race. What does that imply? That implies some powerful, demonic entity that was outside the human race. They weren't human. The ultimate secret, the supreme power, the last initiation. The fact that it was almost completely horrible did not in the least diminish its attraction. Meaning that even though these demonic entities or these fallen angelic entities were so horrible, it still did not diminish his attraction to them, because it was a very powerful attraction. Then he goes on to say in That Hideous Strength, page 269, these creatures or demons breathed death on the human race and on all joy. Not despite this, but because of this, the terrible gravitation sucked and tugged the fascinated toward them. Never before had he known the fruitful strength of the movement opposite of nature, which now had him in its grip. The impulse to reverse all reluctances and to draw every circle anti-clockwise. And again, he's saying the same thing here. He's just saying it in a different way. These demons exerted this terrible gravitation that sucked and tugged those fascinated by them toward them. This is what happens with the occult. These demonic entities, these evil entities, will suck and tug you toward them. Even though they're terrible, you become fascinated with them, and you want to go and participate in this stuff. And then it said, now it had him in its grip, and the impulse to reverse all the reluctances and to draw every circle anti-counterclockwise. In other words, you get to a point where you're in so deep that even if you want to get out, you can't, because they have you in their grip. That's why you don't ever get there. You don't dabble with this kind of stuff, because it's very dangerous. Note that Lewis said that he had trouble with that lust for the occult ever since his encounter with the matron in his boys' school. He wrote that statement in 1955. By then he had written all but 3 of his books. So in other words, he never broke free from this fascination with the occult ever. Never happened. And that's obviously reflected in all of his writings. Lewis said that he was strongly influenced by George MacDonald, who was a Universalist. MacDonald's book, entitled Lilith, is based on the occult teaching that Abraham was married to a demon named Lilith before he married Eve. By the end of MacDonald's book, Lilith is redeemed, and Adam says that even the devil will eventually be redeemed. What a mouthful there that I just said in that little gem of a paragraph. Let's go over this again. Lewis said that he was strongly influenced also by George MacDonald, who was a universalist, Unitarian Universalist. Everybody's going to heaven. Well, what does Aslan teach in C.S. Lewis's book? It said that even though you serve Tash to that one guy, Tash was the devil, I will account everything that you've done to Tash, who is the devil, I will account that worship toward me and account it on your credit. So in other words, even if we live like the devil or if we live good, it's all good. We're all going to heaven. It's a life in the pit of hell. Well, no wonder he wrote The Way. This George MacDonald guy was also one of his guys that influenced him. George MacDonald wrote a book called Lilith. Lilith is the goddess or the devil of child sacrifice, among other things. The goddess of the night, one of the goddesses of death, sexual lust and debauchery, Lilith. He wrote a book named Lilith. And it's based on the occult teaching that Adam was married to a demon named Lilith before he married Eve. Now, I believe that this is part of the whole serpent seed heresy that's now very, very prevalent in Christianity, which says that basically Eve, actually, no, that's different. This is one saying Adam was married to Lilith, okay? There's another theory with the serpent seed where Eve actually had sexual relations with Satan and produced what they call the serpent seed line, okay? And I can totally disprove that just by using the Bible. But this is another theory that Adam was married to a demon named Lilith. See, if they can corrupt the Garden of Eden account, if they can get you to doubt what happened in the Garden of Eden, you can just go ahead and logically throw out the rest of your Bible. Because if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Oh, and this Lilith thing that I just talked about, where Adam was married to a demon named Lilith, this is directly from the Kabbalah, which is probably the most strongest undercurrent about everything that I'm talking about today here, which is the highest form of Jewish mysticism and witchcraft, the Kabbalah. So by the end of MacDonald's book, Lilith is redeemed, and Adam says that even the devil will eventually be redeemed, just like all universalists would say. The universalism shows up in many of Lewis's fiction works. In the last book of Narnia, and we talked about that last week, about the universalist quotes that he said. In the last book of Narnia, which is called The Last Battle, last of the Narnia books, The Last Battle, a pagan makes it to heaven because of his good works and his good motives, in spite of the fact that he did not believe in Aslan, who was their false Christ, who was, represented as Christ. And he worshipped Aslan's enemy, the false god of Tash. I just kind of mentioned that earlier. Lilith also shows up in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Mr. Beaver tells the children that the White Witch is descended from Lilith, who is the first wife of Adam. I'm talking some really serious, blasphemous stuff here. And yet you've got Christians that are loading, pastors and churches that are loading up buses full of Christians and taking them to these movies? Man, to whom much is given, much is required. I don't want any more, dear. Lewis also had a close friend named Owen Barfield. He dedicated the Narnia books to him. Okay, now, this guy was so close to C.S. Lewis that he dedicated the Narnia books to him. His name was Owen Barfield. And he named Lucy after Barfield's daughter. Lucy was one of the main characters in the Chronicles of Narnia. This is how much he liked this guy. Who was Barfield? Barfield was a philosopher who started out with Theosophy and developed it into his own version. Theosophy? You mean Adam H.P. Blavatsky? The Theosophical Society? Yep, same one, where they basically worship Lucifer. Yep, same one. Highly influenced Adolf Hitler and Aleister Crowley, and they're all, yeah, same one. According to Theosophy, the God of the Bible is a tyrant, and Lucifer, the devil, came to rescue him from mankind. came to rescue from mankind from him. I'm sorry. So Lucifer's our good buddy. He's here to rescue us from this God of the Bible who's, they call a tyrant. Now the Bible says, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put sweet for bitter and bitter for sweet, and light for darkness and darkness for light. In Isaiah. So this is what they're doing here. This is what Satan always tries to do. He tries to reverse everything. And this dark view of God shows up in many of C.S. Lewis's writings. Here's quoting from another article titled The Occult. J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and the occult overtones in their writings. This is from Wes Pineri. He's the guy that writes Illuminati News. This is from 1998. Without a doubt, there are lots of obvious links between Tolkien's imagery world and the occult teachings of different secret societies. You have to read The Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion, in particular, to know what I'm talking about. And this is Wes Pineri talking. My first contact with Tolkien's world was in 1968 when a European radio station presented The Hobbit as a summer series. It was a well-produced with different voices for different characters, background sounds, and even singing. I was totally fascinated. The whole scenario of 3D was playing inside my head, and for me it was very real. I was stuck in front of the radio every morning, the whole summer though, and when Thorin died at the end, I was crying as though I had lost a long-lost friend. See, these whether it's an audio depiction, whether it's a movie depiction, or whether it's a book depiction, these writers are so good and demonically inspired at what they do, they draw you into the story, and you become part of the story, essentially. You're there. And when these characters die, these people take these things so seriously that, like this guy, he broke down in tears, crying like a baby. I've heard of people that are involved in Dungeons and Dragons, which is based on a lot of what we're talking about today, this whole Middle Earth thing, that when their characters die, they've actually committed suicide in real life. That's how seriously they take this stuff when they get into this occult fantasy stuff. This isn't reality. This is from the devil. You don't want to immerse your mind in this. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. If you dwell on this, you're going to become part of this fantasy world and lose touch with reality, and surely lose touch with God. Then he goes on to say, I experienced the same thing 2 years later when I read The Lord of the Rings, the episode where Gandalf fell to his death in the depths of Moria, and the enormous relief later when he was reincarnated. Throughout my teens, Tolkien was a big part of my life, and when he died in 1973, I thought the world must have come to an end. Seemed like he had so much more to give, and still the masterpiece which I've been waiting for, the Silmarillion, was not yet released, which was terrible to him. However, his son, Christopher Tolkien, later put Silmarillion together, and to my big satisfaction, it was released. Now, I know I'm probably butchering that name. I'm sorry. Please give me a little grace. So this was actually released, though, in 1977. Of course, Tolkien was a professor in the English language and a wonderful storyteller, no doubt about that. But there is something more to it. Long before I knew anything about occultism, I had the feeling parts of the story was true in some way. Had Middle-earth existed at some time in the past? Tolkien himself relates Middle-earth to what they call Old England. Some of the following can be speculations, but I think that it is interesting to debate it. When we discuss the matter of secret societies and the Illuminati, it is inevitable to make the comparison to Tolkien. Sauron, of course, is Satan Lucifer with his occult power. Now, that's one of his characters in, I guess, The Lord of the Rings. Gandalf is a member of the Brotherhood called the Wizard's Council, which is a secret society in itself with magic rituals and esoteric wisdom. Interesting also that Tolkien created a whole separate world with tunnels and underneath the mountains. Many secret societies claim that the earth is hollow, and strange creatures live underneath the surface of the earth. Now, let me say something about that. Now, as hell is in the center of the earth, this has to be true to a certain extent. Well, what do you mean hell's in the center of the earth? Well, let's look at what the Bible says, okay? Because if I can't back it up with the Bible, what good is it? Let's just look at 7 different verses here from the Bible.